wanted to start maybe by asking you about your work, because you said that you showed here with a work called Surfacing in 2010. Perhaps to start with that discussion and your relationship to the city of Dakar, because you're here for the second time in Dakar.
Okay, so it's great to be back. I did actually in this garden here, I did a work that was based on mermaid myths, which are incredibly present in West Africa. I came from Ghana, I was living in Ghana at the time, and to me those myths were important because they spoke about the past, about the here and now also, and about cross-fertilization that comes through water. Okay, so very, very, very contemporary stuff, you know, in terms of people moving bodies, but also commerce across, you know, different trade routes that come through, fluid trade routes. So yeah, so it was one of the first projects I guess I did that was really, let's say, Africa, that came out of having lived a number of years here in West Africa.
So you said that the continuation, that project really began as an investigation into mermaids specifically.
Yeah, and it actually ended up, I mean, here I did them with plastics that I bought in markets from, you know how they have the umbrellas, the black plastics. But at the moment I've got a show on in Italy in the Fondazione Pino Pascali where the plastic had through a very natural process, an intuitive process over a year or two, turned into actual hair extensions. So I bought thousands and thousands of hair extensions in the markets of Adjamé in Abidjan. Because the hair, the long black hair, is part of the look of the traditional look of the mermaid. She has long black straight hair and she comes from afar. And most of those hair mesh now are made in China. So it really is about different worlds colliding once again through mythology.
And another show you have at the moment is at the Cécile Fakhoury Gallery. Could you perhaps talk about that show and how you think of the show in relation perhaps to the bigger projects you've done in Dakar, the Pino Pasquale Foundation?
Okay, well the work that I'm doing with Cécile, to me actually it's really important work. It comes out of the experience of living in Ivory Coast and also helped form the experience of living, you know, because I also use my work as a way of not only of describing but also seeing myself the situation. So the first part is called Selling Dreams, and it's a series of photographs that describe the world of, you'll see it also here in Dakar, but more so in Ivory Coast, the world of publicity, the incredible affiche publicitaire that describe this kind of pantheon of super beings, creatures of desire who live slightly suspended above us, but are actually telling us in the here and now what is that people aspire to. So I photograph those images with the world of we, terrestrial beings around, and also the juxtaposed often against the wonderful but very frayed modernist architecture that was really an architecture of hope. And you know, when in a sense with this boom, one could say there's a new period of hope. I might have feelings about that, but that's a different story. But basically I thought, how can I portray, how can I describe visually an African city in a way that perhaps is something that comes out of my own European way of seeing, which is obviously hugely part of me, but also says something about this city that maybe is, you know, getting away from a lot, you know, it's very difficult, especially for people who aren't born in situations to make a visual comment on them without maybe falling into stereotypes, right? I mean, that's always a challenge for all of us. So by describing this world, which is a world specific in a way to Abidjan, but also Pan-African, and also many of the publicities will be seen probably in smaller versions in other countries in the world, because in Abidjan they're huge. But it's very similar to a kind of almost like, dare I say, a spiritual pantheon. They're towards the sky. They are like us, but they are also, they have what we don't have, but what we might want. They just, you know, one way of describing historically what's happened, and I think my job as an artist is also to kind of like catch things before they've gone.
Yes, because we've talked about that before, and I was interested about the role of memory in your work, because you talked about you're interested in collecting photographs perhaps that would otherwise be, how do you say,
because
lost.
could
you talk about the relationship maybe between Africa and memory and this issue of forgetting, and whether your work could be seen as a kind of protest against forgetting?
I don't think it's a protest. I think it's something about care. That kind of, the artist also, I mean, this might, I might have the right words for this, but the artist also as a kind of curator and as a nurturer. So I think probably when I was younger I wouldn't have realized this, but getting older I'm actually aware how quickly things are changing. I mean, I grew up without internet. So I'm aware that we're living through a moment of enormous transformation, and that, everything's happening so fast that things can immediately be forgotten. So I guess one of the roles that I've taken on, almost without deciding, but it's become part of who I am, is to kind of, it's a preserver of memory, of memories that might otherwise immediately, we all throw things away thinking that they're not useful. But when societies start throwing it away, then, maybe the artist has to say, hang on.
And I think this interest in as kind of social dialogue, or at least a feeling of preserving memory, is perhaps related to your experiences as an art therapist and your perhaps background in dealing with people.
Also think, yes, I think that's probably true, and I think it's also probably a lot to do with the fact that I've moved around such a lot myself, and I've worked as an artist in many different countries, and I'm always trying to remember, because I don't have the physical evidence around me of where I was before, unlike most people who, perhaps live in the same place. So, yeah, I'm aware of that.
I think I was having a conversation with the artist Ellen Gallagher the other day, who said how she wants her work to give her access to today, yesterday, a day as well as tomorrow. And do you think part of your interest in memory has to do with wanting to preserve, I guess, what could be seen as this sort of passage of time, which is very fleeting, I think, specifically in Africa, where so much is changing and transforming before our eyes?
Yeah, I guess I suppose you could say every time that, like you take a photo or you create something that then has its own existence, then in a sense you're trying to maybe defy time, right? Of course we can't. But maybe there's that kind of wanting in some way to be kind of an alchemist in that, but I think that to create images that people, that the viewer can actually stop and decide how much time he or she wants to look at and reflect on, is one of the very few. We live in an era also where the word freedom is thrown around it's totally abused. So to create art, I think, is one of the few truly democratic zones that's still left in the society we live in, and we have to really hold on to that. So that's probably, to me, the most important thing. I mean, that and something that we were talking about before, which is, as I said, I'm getting more and more into that kind of thing, like, okay, I'm doing this, but is the work looking at me, or am I looking at the work? Right, so I think that, you often hear writers who say the book wrote itself.
Does the artwork make itself?
Is the artwork saying, hey, who's going to make me? Right? And every era, I think there's the artwork that's saying, hey, wake up, like, who's going to make me?
Yeah. So do you think that there's also something in the idea, because you talk about the particularity of words like freedom, and we talked earlier about the idea of love, and you said how the show at the Pascali Foundation is called I Love You, so perhaps how your work could maybe be a labour of love, because you're collecting these photographs and almost becoming a conservator.
Absolutely. Well, when I said there's the element of care, right? Yeah. And I think if you use words like that, which aren't very fashionable at the moment, I think you have to have a fairly strong sense of your own authority. But I also think that's about humility, and I think it's about this other word that is quite, although there seems to be a lot of it here, I must say, which is a thing called responsibility. Like, am I in some way as an artist responsible in society? And if so, how? And that's one of the questions that each artist will answer in his or her own way, and with as many answers as there are artists. But I certainly think it's a question that has to be not denied.
One of the things I'm interested in, because we've seen so much work already during the Dakar Biennale, and if you could just discuss.
I've hardly seen anything. I just got here.
Well, maybe I think we talked earlier about the breakdown between disciplinary boundaries, and perhaps you could expand on perhaps how your work isn't bound to any specific types of mediums, because I've seen collage, but I've also seen installation work.
Okay, well, for example, the collage had a lot to do with memory, so to me it seemed like the perfect visual metaphor, that fragmentation, for what actually happens when you try to remember, to bring together once again, and it always creates a different story. So I think collage in that sense was the perfect medium. But I tend to have, not a medium, I tend to have an idea. Once I've got the idea, then the question is, in which medium should I try to express this idea? Which is the medium that's most coherent, congruent with that particular whatever it is that I want to do? I mean, obviously I don't command all the mediums, so I'm not totally free in that, but I think that's one of the exciting things about now. It's also very dangerous, right? Because you can end up actually not knowing your own boundaries, and we all know that if we're going to go back to that word freedom, there's freedom within boundaries. So.